Pan American, the world's most experienced airline, the airline that brings you jet travel from the United States to Europe, presents...
Good evening. Chet Huntley reporting. It's beginning to appear that historians will note that on October 4th, 1957, Americans lost their confidence. And on December 18th, 1958, they won it back. It was on October 4th, 1957, that the Russians launched the first man-made satellite ever to orbit the Earth. This considerable scientific achievement set off a whole series of self-examinations in this country, examinations of our defense, of our government system, of our high schools and colleges, of our swollen consumers' economy. 10 days ago, the United States Air Force launched into orbit an Atlas weighing more than 4 tons. The fact that it's the biggest satellite ever launched is its most spectacular attribute, but not its most important. It was a brilliantly conceived, beautifully designed, and competently executed project using techniques of a high order of sophistication and speaking well for the intelligence and capabilities of those involved. But there's a real danger that this sparkling achievement and the resulting lift in American morale will cut off all the important American self-examinations before any one of them has achieved any tangible change in any important area of our national life. But this should not obscure the brightness of the story of Atlas 10B.
This is Chet Huntley reporting, a program of news and comment for television, produced by the News Department of the National Broadcasting Company. Today's program, a special one-hour report on the story of Atlas 10B, continues in 2 minutes. First, this message.
This is Pan Am flight bags. At this very moment, you might see one in Trafalgar Square, along the Champs-Élysées, or in the Piazza di Spagna, for it is rapidly becoming the mark of the jet travelers of Europe. What is it like to fly on the Pan Am jet clipper, and how have these Pan Am jets, in such a short period of time, become the first choice of over 2,500 transatlantic passengers every week? Well, the reasons begin to become apparent when you first set eyes on your Pan American jet clipper. First, you notice its great size, and then you notice there are no propellers. This identifies it as a jet. The takeoff is smooth, effortless. There is no surging vibration because there are no pistons, no propellers to cause built-in headwind. Pan Am's jet power is a smooth, silent stream of seemingly perpetual motion. Engineers call it thrust. Thrust that takes you quickly above the weather at speeds up to 600 miles an hour. And yet for you, there is no sense of speed, no feeling of height, no vibration, only an incomparable smoothness. Time literally flies. When you land, you are surprised to find how refreshed you are, no feeling of travel fatigue. Pan Am jet service is the fastest to Europe, the only jet service to Paris and Rome. And only Pan Am offers economy class jet service. For example, one way to London, just $252. Of course, the Look President Special Service is also available on all flights. Today, 6 out of every 7 jet travelers are choosing Pan Am, the most experienced way to travel to Europe. Yes, fly on the world's most experienced airline, on the world's most thoroughly flight-tested aircraft. This is Stuart Finley. Thank you.
1 month ago today, the United States, for the first time, successfully launched an intercontinental missile. An Atlas flew more than 6,000 statute miles. And the missile which made the successful flight was the Atlas 8B. Now, that's the 8th vehicle of the Atlas B series. Last spring, 2 successive Atlases made spectacular pictures as they were destroyed when barely off the pad, and the image of billowing smoke and showering debris became a symbol of our self-evaluation in the missile age. But the successful flight of an Atlas a month ago went generally unnoticed, but with it, some of the military and research gap between us and the Soviet Union was closed. The needs of our diplomacy are sure to change from foreign bases for intermediate missiles to domestic bases for intercontinental missiles. But 3 weeks later, on December 18th, the 10th vehicle of the Atlas B series was successfully launched and went into orbit. And finally, the American imagination caught fire. And it may be that for all its achievements, Atlas 10B is more important as a symbol than for what it does. But like all such stories, the story of Atlas 10B begins best at Cape Canaveral, Florida. Each weekday morning, the big double doors at headquarters, Cape Canaveral Air Force Missile Test Center, burst open, and the commanding general goes into orbit. 49-year-old Major General Donald Yates, who speaks quietly but never walks when he can run, commands the largest missile-proving ground in the free world. His responsibilities range from the physics of outer space to the formal welcome for visiting brass. For a year now, VIPs have descended on Cape Canaveral at the rate of 22 per day. This day, they included a brace of Japanese generals, who were originally scheduled to arrive December 7th, until someone, figuring discretion was the better part of diplomacy, rescheduled them for the 9th. During the same week, Yates extended the ruffles and flourishes treatment to Air Secretary Douglas and to Prince Constantine of Greece. On a classified date this fall, an important visitor of another type began a cross-country trip to Cape Canaveral. It was an Atlas rocket just off the Convair assembly line in San Diego, California. Almost 100 feet of truck and trailer heading east on a mission known only to a select few. By mid-December, a few hundred would know roughly what the missile was designed to accomplish. Only a few score would know the details in the hoped-for payoff. To the technicians who would nurse the rocket to perfection, it would be known only as another B-series Atlas. To the thousands who saw it coming across country, it was just a mysterious shape shrouded in gray canvas and a sizable bottleneck to the free flow of traffic. The next to last stop was Cape Canaveral's closely guarded industrial area, where the missile builders go painstakingly over their metallic progeny behind closed hangar doors. The missiles, thoroughly inspected before they leave the factory, are again checked out part by part. An Atlas has more than 40,000 parts. Then, the last leg of the cross-country journey, the 2 miles to the launching pad. There's a second cab over the rear wheels of the trailer, the fireman's hook and ladder principle applied to space-age logistics. Cape Canaveral, as Florida real estate goes, is not especially impressive. Flat, sandy stretches broken by low, rolling mounds, a mat of palmetto and scrub oak breaking up the skyline, hiding all but the tops of the tall red and white missile gantry. Officially, these structures are known as service towers, but only newcomers and purists use the formal nomenclature. And then the end of the line, Pad 11. One Series B Atlas, worth more than $1 million, passed through a final cordon of security to its waiting gantry. Most missiles, including the 1,500-mile range Thors, are flown to Cape Canaveral in the bellies of transport planes. But the big Atlas, anchored to its trailer at the factory, remained in its earthbound cradle of welded steel until it was hoisted into firing position. This Atlas was like all others in one respect. Each individual part was as finely machined as 20th century technology could devise. But added together, they weighed a bulky 4.5 tons. And it took simple, old-fashioned brute force to nudge them into position. The muscle supplied by salaried engineers. 100 yards away, inside a heavily reinforced blockhouse, other engineers were also making initial preparations for launching the Atlas. The man in charge, 31-year-old Curt Johnson, the contractor's test conductor. He came here in July 1958, typical of the young men who manipulate the missile age. So far, he has launched 3 Atlases successfully. No failure. The preparation of a test missile is a deceptively slow process. Much of what goes on becomes important to an outsider only in retrospect. The number 10B, painted in black on the base of the rocket, was at this time just another serial number. It would not remain so. The Atlas is a liquid-burning rocket. The fuel is a hydrocarbon resembling kerosene. The liquid oxygen that makes the fuels burn so fiercely is manufactured on the base at Cape Canaveral. The components of the plant, as massive as they seem, are designed for portability. No single component is too large to be placed on a railway flat car for shipment. It's a factor which becomes important in the selection of new missile bases. Liquid oxygen is known in the missile business as LOX. The plant at Cape Canaveral can turn out 150 tons of LOX a day and 15 tons of liquid nitrogen. This capacity is more than enough to supply the present needs of the base. Liquid oxygen doesn't burn, but it promotes burning and must be handled with care. Its temperature is 297 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The color of most liquefied gases is about the same as clear water. The color of liquid oxygen is a limpid pale blue. It's transported to the launching pads in special insulated containers. These trucks were loading up to fuel Atlas 10B for a static firing. A full power test with the missile anchored to its base. By this time, it was approximately 7 days before the projected launching date. The missile had been checked from tip to base. Only the nose cone was missing. 2 previous static tests had failed. Careful examination had failed to turn up what was wrong. Finally, X-ray was tried, and one tiny part of 40,000 parts was found to be functioning improperly. If X-ray had not discovered the culprit, Atlas 10B would have had to make the long cross-country trek back to San Diego. This test, the third, would succeed if nothing else was wrong. Condition red. Evacuate the pads. The fire truck, which stood by all during the fueling operation, left with the other vehicles. 6 cameras operated by remote control, all buttoned up. By now, everyone was safe. Only the people in the blockhouse were less than a half mile from the missile. The waiting was reduced to seconds. By the time the gray-blue clouds had begun to boil up, the outcome of the static firing was clear to the experts. The yellow flame was bright and steady. The firing a success. A big day's work done. Some headed for Ramon's Bar, playground for a closed inbred community. The men of the missile age, physicians, clerks, mathematicians, guards, truck drivers, West Pointers, dead-end kids, civil service typists, all sharing a common language, which includes the fanciful names of the space vehicles, including the Navy's solid-fuel Polaris, which almost landed on the town in its initial test.
They'd like to hear the Cape Canaveral version of Polaris. Okay? Oh, Polaris. Polaris. Look out below. The apple sequence. That's trouble too. Yes, you heard me. You march the moon.
simple in the missile age community. Recreational facilities tend to be unsophisticated. These are mostly family people, church-going people who spend their time off in the supermarket or at the movies, fishing, boating, or playing tennis, or spending a quiet late afternoon hour chattering at Ramon's. December 18th, a week after the static firing. For the first time, Atlas 10B had a nose cone, one that seemed more pointed than usual. At 8 o'clock in the morning, they had started the countdown for launching. Now it was afternoon, and the countdown was still almost on schedule. One more load of sandbags through the gate to protect the blockhouse TV camera against the launching blast. The yellow light, fueling underway. Since this day, there have been reports that it was all a secret from all but a dozen, or 35, or 88 men. Accounts vary. But it couldn't have been that secret. These are old hands in the rocket business, fully aware there was more fuel than usual in this Atlas. It had to mean something. Many who were not told must have figured it out for themselves. But even in the blockhouse, where it takes a crew of almost 50 men to launch a missile, there were many who considered this a routine launch. As routine, that is, as any launch of a space vehicle still in the experimental stage. Over a mile away at Central Control, where ultimate authority in any launch rests, preparations kept pace with those in the blockhouse, concentrating here on checking out the tracking stations along the projected course of the missile. A dozen miles away at Patrick Air Force Base, the director of range operations worked even later than usual. As it turned out, the tracking stations down the missile range toward Africa would not be needed for this rocket. It was slated for a more ambitious flight than even the 5,000-mile flight of the full-range intercontinental Atlas. Once again, condition red. Ambulance and fire truck wait for the departure of the stragglers. Now, a half hour before T-0, the minute details of the countdown have been completed. Whole units check in. The Azusa tracking system, the telemetry data gathering equipment. Go for a condition of readiness, no go for a malfunction. Outside, night had fallen, and the missile Atlas 10B stood alone, bathed in the glare of floodlights. For test conductor Curtis Johnson, the young man with a string tie, the burden of responsibility was beginning to gather.
Switch on. Starting foam removal.
A final check from telemetry and Azusa. Only minutes now till T-0.
Goes the walk around.
Pressurization, satisfactory. Water system,
Satisfaction.
range operation,
All clear.
tone, nose tone bomb,
Clear of missile.
all the pre-start panel lights are green. The missile prep complete light is green. All recorders dispatched. T-minus 25 seconds. Counting.
rehearsal track. Looks good. Plus 50 seconds. Plus 60 seconds. 60 seconds. RF system still on track here. Azusa still go. Plus 90 seconds. Plus 90 seconds.
The tension was over. Atlas 10B was off the ground. Now the staggering burden of responsibility had passed on to other hands. The blockhouse crew had done its job. Test conductor Johnson had launched his fourth successful Atlas.
Mike 1. Mike 2.
IT system downrange locked on. Radar station 5 has traction. 230.
The congratulations were for getting the missile off the ground. Most of the people in the room still assumed it was bound southeast along the Atlantic Range, aiming at an impact point some 5,000 miles away. It would be an hour and a half before anyone knew that Atlas 10B was in orbit. Longer than that for many of her blockhouse crew to get the word. The post-launch letdown had already set in. Headsets were off for the first time in hours. Time now to work the cramps out of legs and have a leisurely smoke. The next announcement concerning Atlas 10B would come from President Eisenhower.
Just went behind a cloud.
Atlas 10B was launched at 2 minutes after 6 p.m. Thursday, December 18th. It carried enough fuel to burn 13 seconds more than a normal Atlas missile does. This 13 seconds of additional thrust was needed to take it out of an Earth-to-Earth or ballistic path into orbit. Before 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 18th, it had successfully orbited the Earth once. The President of the United States made this announcement to a White House diplomatic dinner. I've just been advised that a satellite is in orbit and its weight is nearly 9,000 pounds. But there were two things the President did not tell his guests. First, that unlike all other satellites which had been kicked into orbit by a special additional engine set off at the strategic moment, Atlas 10B had been steered into orbit by the same engine which had taken it aloft. And second, that tucked in with the rest of the scientific equipment and test devices aboard Atlas 10B were two RCA receiver transmitters which are conducting an important experiment in communication. The nose cone receivers accept messages from Earth. The transmitters send them back whenever they're asked to. And RCA's description of its system looks forward to using Earth satellites as relay stations for voice messages, cryptograms, and even international television. These will make possible communication with men in space, without which there'll be no point in sending men into space, and also offer a whole new spectrum of capability for men on Earth to communicate with other men on Earth. The President knew about this project because he had taken part in it. 2 days before the launching, he had recorded the message on tape. The tape carrying the Eisenhower message had not reached Canaveral in time to be put in the nose cone of Atlas 10B. But rather than delay the test, those in charge transmitted the message into the nose cone recorders by radio signals. And this accounts for the fact that it was scratchy and a little garbled when played back to Earth from the orbiting Atlas. Here is the President's message as he recorded it.
This is the President of the United States speaking. Through the marvels of scientific advance, my voice is coming to you from a satellite circling in outer space. My message is a simple one. Through this unique means, I convey to you and to all mankind America's wish for peace on earth and goodwill toward men everywhere.
And here it is, as played back from Atlas and received on Earth.
This is the President of the United States speaking.
These reporters heard the first voice from outer space on a Pentagon space machine.
In outer space. Through this unique means, I convey to you, into all mankind, America's wish for peace on earth and goodwill toward men everywhere.
The President, who had recorded his message several days before the Atlas was launched, listened to its return with rapt attention.
In outer space. Through this unique means, I convey to you, into all mankind, America's wish for peace on earth and goodwill toward men everywhere. Speaking. Through the marvels of scientific advance, my voice is coming to you from a satellite.
It's always hard to identify the start of a new age or know what it has in store when you can spot it. But the sound you just heard may well be just that, the start of a new age. It's a term we use oftener these days than we used to because ages don't last as long as they once did, or new ones take as long to evolve. But I want to come back to the story of Atlas 10B in 1 minute.
Pan American World Airways is known to many thousands of travelers as the #1 U.S. flag carrier to 79 lands and countries around the world. During the past 2 months, you've read about the success of Pan Am's great jet trippers to Europe. In fact, today, Pan American is the leader in transatlantic jet travel. Less well known is Pan Am's participation in our government's vital Cape Canaveral project. Since July 1953, Pan American's Guided Missiles Range Division has assumed responsibility as prime contractor to the U.S. Air Force for management, operation, and maintenance of the 5,000-mile Atlantic missile range. The range begins at Cape Canaveral, Florida, and includes 13 islands ranging from tiny cays to islands as large as Puerto Rico, plus 11 ocean range vessels. Behind tomorrow's headlines, you'll find the story of Pan American working hand in hand with our government, answering the challenge of the space age, just as today it has met the challenge of the commercial jet age.
Air Force scientists who launched Atlas 10B into orbit estimated at first it would stay up there 20 days. Well, late last week, General Schriever, who commands outer space for the Air Force, changed the estimate to 40 days. This means that 10B will last well on into the new year. But its fortunes and discoveries will be the first big story of 1959.
Meet the Press, regularly seen at this time, returns next week with Senator Paul Douglas, Illinois Democrat, and Senator Jacob Javits, New York Republican. This portion of Chet Huntley reporting has been brought to you by Pan American, who reminds you, for reservations to 79 lands on 6 continents around the world, call your travel agent or Pan American, world's most experienced airline.
See the fabulous Steve Allen Show in color tonight.
What you hear is the voice of President Eisenhower broadcasting a Christmas message to the world. The source of the broadcast is a tape recording inside Atlas 10B, a satellite now orbiting the Earth every 100 minutes. The satellite weighs more than 4 tons, the biggest man-made moon ever launched. A highly complex scientific laboratory, especially in the field of communications. Also a propaganda victory for the United States throughout the world. A as these newspaper headlines show.
NBC News presents Chet Huntley reporting, part 2 of a special one-hour program on the story of Atlas 10B.
Missiles and rockets are a going thing, and the big thing, with millions of dollars of invested capital, a constant interchange of challenging ideas, a trade press, and a full human organization. Skilled and careful journalists have spent time and effort reporting this new world, but not all the press reports or all the film I've seen bring out what anyone can see for himself halfway down the coast of Florida. Most of the rockets in the news are huge and complicated structures. When you see an Atlas close up, you can understand what it is that costs $1 million. They're not firecrackers or toys or artillery. These are complex machines requiring great numbers of men to handle each one of them. And all rockets aren't alike, and none of them looks like a small candle disappearing upward into the darkness. Atlas 10B was one of many vehicles, a very special one, it's true, but because Cape Canaveral is a place for experiments, each of the many is special in its own way. Each represents countless man-hours of production, and before that and after it, countless man-hours of thought. Each represents a bundle of ideas, ideas as to fuel, ideas as to use, ideas as to the nature of gravity and the nature of space. Well, there's going to be more and more missile talk and missile picture in our news media from now on, and it seems to me that if you have some appreciation of the size and organization of the effort which goes into any missile, you'll better understand debates over solid versus liquid fuels and discussions about trips inside the solar system and beyond, and all the rest of the torrent of words that's just beginning to get started.
The Cape Canaveral Missile Test Center, with its administrative headquarters 12 miles away at Patrick Air Force Base, is the proving ground for American rockets. It's a job requiring the services of almost 19,000 employees. Each weekday morning between 6:30 and 8, more than 1,700 cars pass through Cape Canaveral's main gates. Everyone who enters the base must have a badge, on which are his picture and a code, designating which areas he'll be allowed to enter. 200 new permanent passes and 200 temporary ones are issued during an average day. Those who get them range from cafeteria cooks to well-known scientists. Security arrangements at the Cape are handled by civilian employees of the prime contractor and housekeeper, Pan American World Airways. The guards are responsible to the Provost Marshal. They check every man and every car that enters. Even General Yates, commander of the test center, must be identified. Yates is Air Force. This is an Air Force installation providing facilities to handle the missile tests of all three military services and their civilian contractors. Among the most tightly restricted zones on the base are the innocuous-appearing hangars of the industrial area. This is the Army hangar where a Jupiter missile, just in from the factory, was opened up for an inch-by-inch check. These are, we're told, the first journalistic films ever shot in the Canaveral hangars. The security is this strict because it's here that the highly classified internal workings of the rocket are exposed for inspection. The maze of wires and pipes that mean so little to an outsider and so much to a rocket expert. Cape Canaveral's Army pad at 3 o'clock on a cold, clear December morning. The temperature 40 degrees. All night long, the launching crew has been hard at work. The scheduled firing time was less than an hour away, and the Army has a reputation for getting its missiles off on schedule. Newsmen assigned to Canaveral halfway suspect nighttime launchings are a conspiracy against them. Actually, it would already be dawn where this Jupiter came down. The timing was carefully considered because this particular nose cone housed our first space monkey. Little old Reliable, the newspapers would call him the next day. Only a few people were in on the secret. To everyone else, it was a routine launch, a phrase that needs some qualification. To the general public, accustomed to watching the missile launches on a 17-inch screen from film made by a cameraman a mile or more from the launch pad, all but the failures look routine. But close up, even the preparation is a spine-tingling spectacle.
The drama intensified as the gantry begins to roll back. The time, 4 a.m., December 6th. The countdown at T-minus 7 seconds. Little old reliable, the space monkey was on his way. In 15 minutes, he would be 1,700 miles downrange. But they never found him. At Cape Canaveral, downrange is southeast, across the Atlantic to Ascension Island off the Africa coast. A 5,000-mile route studded with land and ship stations to track missiles and gather data from them. Since 1950, more than 500 missiles have headed downrange. In the past month, at least 11 firings, including 2 400-mile Beaumarks. Range 6,000 miles. 3 fired in the past 30 minutes. An Air Force 4, range 1,500 miles. Both fired in a month's time. One way or another, General Yates manages to see all but the minor firings. Here on closed-circuit TV, even in the headquarters building a good 15 miles from the pad, there is a certain amount of tension. Firing time on this particular December evening was about 8 o'clock. If everything went well, the general could go home. If something went seriously wrong, he would probably be up most of the night. The prime responsibility for the launch lay on someone else's shoulders, but many of the repercussions would end up here. This night, everything worked. From his Patrick Air Force Base headquarters, General Yates runs one of the most important military installations in the world. It's also, in terms of square miles, one of the largest. Each Tuesday at 8 in the morning, he meets with his staff to take up the problems that come with running an installation extending from Florida almost to Africa. Problems that range from missile schedules to community relations to the morale of men stationed thousands of miles downrange. Cape Canaveral from the air, 10 miles of sand jutting into the Atlantic. A good part of its shoreline dotted with concrete pads. Until the missile age, this stretch of coast was best known as a home base for shrimp boats. Fishing in general was good, but even in December, the mosquitoes were vicious. They still are. Recently, when a rocket misfired and burned up a few acres of underbrush, security guards were busy half a day killing rattlesnakes. The gantry is to the missile what a hangar is to an airplane. Each kind of rocket has its own distinctive type. These house intermediate-range Thors. Structures like these will not become the trademarks of missile bases. Missiles, when they become operational, need relatively simple service facilities. It's only during the experimental stage, when all parts of the missile must be accessible for inspection or replacement, that these elaborate gantries are needed. The Thor, and you're looking at the business end with a heavy cap over the nose cone, is almost out of the experimental stage. Bases for its use are already under construction in England. Italy is on the verge of allowing Thor bases on her soil. The French, among other West European countries, have so far refused permission. North of the Thor pads are those of the Atlas. Again, the distinctive gantry, in this case 12 stories tall. The elevator goes up to the 11th. The Atlas, in a way, has been the pampered darling of the Cape. Everyone knew the Russians had an intercontinental missile. Our capability until a month ago was still theoretical. The first full range of the Atlas touched off the biggest celebration ever held at Cape Canaveral. But the mighty Atlas is delicate. It must be constantly pressurized to sustain its own weight. The most solid structures on the Cape are the blockhouses. They lie a scant 100 yards from the pads. Those from which Atlases are fired have 4-foot-thick concrete walls and ceiling, topped by 10 feet of sand, the sand held in place by another 8-inch layer of concrete. Inside, the crews watch their missiles through periscopes and on TV monitors. The top-secret missile at Cape Canaveral right now is the Navy's solid-fuel Polaris, designed for intermediate range. Even its external configuration in the gantry is screened off by canvas. These are letters from people who will grow up to accept rockets as an everyday fact of life. Each week, the base post office gets 800 letters from children. On many, the address is less than precise. Some of the letters offer advice. There are quite a few requests for full-scale missiles. All are sincere and are so treated. The sender, who may grow up to become a missile man, gets a collection of pictures for his efforts. This is Central Control, the link between the crew in the blockhouse and the downrange tracking station. It's also the focal point of the tracking and data-gathering equipment on the Cape itself. This is where the command decisions are made. Most of the personnel are military, and this is where General Yates likes to be for a critical launching. On this day, the mission was more or less routine. The interception of a remote-controlled B-17 by a Snark, a subsonic guided missile. The mission was later scrubbed. The Snark was ready to go, but the ancient B-17 wouldn't function properly. Central Control is crammed with electronic equipment, but responsibility remains a human function. The range safety officer who must decide whether to blow up a $1 million rocket. The supervisor of range operations whose decision is over that of even the test conductor in the blockhouse. Many of these decisions are based on information from highly specialized electronic units. One is called telemetry. Its 60-foot wide tracking antenna follows the flight of the ballistic missile. A hitch in its operation can halt a countdown as effectively as a faulty rocket engine on the pad. The primary purpose of the telemetry unit is to gather data radioed back to Earth by the missile as it hurtles through space. Without telemetry, there would be no precise knowledge of missile behavior. Another key unit in the missile support structure is the Azusa system. It, too, is a tracking station, but primarily concerned with maintaining a running record of the position of the missile in flight. It also can determine, with a high degree of accuracy, just where a missile would fall if an engine failed in the powered phase of flight. All this electronic wizardry requires a staggering amount of electrical cable. There is enough cable at one Atlas pad to circle the Earth. Pads now on the design board will require twice that amount. Another use for cable, the updating of present equipment. A 4,000-cube electronic brain at the impact predictor is slated for replacement by one even more complex and precise. Even so, the individual technician has an important job, and most take intense pride in their work. Here on the fringe of the brave new world, engineering imagination is a priceless commodity. Most of the civilian employees who man the electronic machines at Cape Canaveral are young, technicians in their late 20s, engineers in their 30s. In one unit, the average of professional experience was less than 10 years. There are no old hands in the rocket business. General Yates, still on the go, this time on behalf of public information, headed for the base theater to brief reporters on an early December lunar probe. For the first 20-odd years of his professional life, the general had virtually no contact with the press. At Cape Canaveral, he learned the facts of journalistic life the hard way and came up with a workable solution to an impossible security situation. This hold-for-release briefing was a far cry from the days when reporters stood outside the Cape on the beaches, watched the rockets fire or fail, and then wrote their stories, not always certain they had even the correct type of missile. From host to reporters to host for a visiting VIP, the occasion was the Army's lunar probe. Major General John B. Medeiros on the pad for a final look. The Air Force and the Army were on a stiff race to see which service could first send a rocket to the moon. And the Air Force General was doing his best to provide the Army with all the necessary assistance. Just before Atlas 10B was launched, a talk with General Yates in his office. I got an astonishingly vigorous answer when I facetiously asked him whether he didn't sometimes feel like a two-star landlord.
I've worried as much of the landlord as, I'll guarantee you, on the problems, just the living problems that we have, housing and all of the problems that are associated with a very large community. We brought a large number of people into a small community, enlarged it, and they've done their best to meet our requirements, but the roads haven't kept up, the housing hasn't kept up, and we do have difficult problems. However, we're getting along, and things are getting better.
And then you have to apportion space out there on the Cape, too, do you not?
Yes, but every contractor, every service and contractor has a certain amount of space allocated for his job. When we run out, we try to build additional space and facilities, and there's always a sweat as to whether we can get it built on time, but we haven't missed yet. We haven't held up the program because of lack of facilities.
Is this work getting easier, or is it getting tougher all the time?
That's tough because actually each missile gets easier to fire as it gets down the road. But when it gets real easy to fire, we don't want it around here anymore. We hand it over to the troops. As the new programs come in, they all go through the growing pains. They all have their spectacular so-called failures, spectacular incidents, but we understand our job better. We're going along very, very well, I would say. I don't think the job will ever be easy. It's mighty interesting.
Has there ever been a missile from Cape Canaveral that has been an unmitigated, total, dismal failure?
Well, this isn't probably the right way to express it, but if we had had a complete failure, I would have considered, the only way that I can find we could have had a complete failure would be had the missile performed absolutely perfectly, done everything it was supposed to do, and if we learned nothing, after when we analyzed all the data, we found we had to repeat the shot because we gained nothing. If that can give you an indication, maybe the worse the failure, the more information we get on a failure, certainly the more we learn and the faster we progress. Missiles, as anything else, are going to fail during the development program. When they cease failing, when they cease malfunctioning, we don't want them around here. We want to give them to the troops and get on to the next family of missiles. So, in general, no, we never have a missile failure.
What's the most powerful missile thus far set off from the base?
The other.
And in terms of pounds of thrust, what was that?
Well, I think that it's been advertised as generally in the area of 350 to 400,000 pounds.
Now, are more powerful ones projected for the future?
Yes, I don't think there's any question. As you know, that it has been announced that the Army is working on a combined chamber engine of a million to 1.5 million pounds of thrust. I don't know exactly what the thrust will be, but that if it's going to be fired in test, I'm sure it'll be fired from the Cape. Actually, we have an area set aside for the next group of launch stands thrust in that area. That is a very high thrust engine. Then actually we have set aside at the point of the Cape another area for engines that, let's say, out in the blue, which will be considered to be higher thrust than that. Although there are no firm programs, I'm sure that we will shoot fire engines of extremely high thrust.
General Yates, would you hesitate to send a tested missile over Miami or New York?
Present time, I think I would hesitate just on general principles. Safety is a real important thing with us. You can recognize that if we had one disaster in the area, it would be kind of tough on the operation of the morale of the people. The people around here are confident that we are exercising every bit of safety that we can, at all the precautions that we possibly can. And right at the present time, I wouldn't want to fire over Miami. But we fly over Miami in aircraft, and why shouldn't missiles go over Miami sometime when we're down the line? Not this year, maybe next year.
General Yates, it seems to me that we are learning that it takes a number of things, including brain power, to launch man into the space age. But what is the relationship between the dollar and our advent into the age of space?
Well, I think that dollars are what we needed to actually get out into the space business. We were progressing with a minimum adequate military budget along the development of specific military weapons. Weapons that could bomb cities at 1,500 to 5,500 nautical miles. The advent of Sputnik, the importance of space research, I think was a little bit better recognized. At least the money loosened up a little bit, and more money was put into the business of going out into space, as well as doing a straight military job. This, I think, is extremely important, but it's a question of how much the economy of the country can stand. In this case, progress in space is right now, in my opinion, directly related to the amount of money we put on it up to a certain limit. We have the capability, we have the vehicles, we have propulsion, we have the instrumentation. Money will put us out there.
General, what will missiles be doing in another 50 years?
I certainly can't give you a good, honest answer, but we will be far out in space. We probably won't even know of these things as missiles, except the few that we have to have on hand to act as a deterrent to war. We will be out in space and on other planets, I'm sure.
General Yates expects, as all Americans likely do, that we shall be traveling in space a half-century from now. Well, I didn't ask him whether we're equipped to get there or to be there, because it's a mean question and an unfair one to ask a man in uniform. This is public policy, which by American tradition, uniformed men don't make but accept. At a time of our greatest wealth, however, we begrudge our schools, while at the same time Americans without the faintest idea of what used to be high school mathematics talk glibly of interstellar space. Like the blind man and the elephant in the Indian fable, each of us has hold of a piece of the problem, thinking it's the whole problem. And the whole problem is hard to define, but its best symptom is this: we're not producing enough educated people. Not only scientists and engineers, but philosophers and classicists. Not only mathematicians, but poets. And since these last two are so closely related, it's ironic that one should be emphasized at the expense of the other. But someday we need better school buildings and higher paid teachers, and others that we need more content in our teaching. That's what they all say, and they attack the same problem from different angles and fight each other, both groups refusing to acknowledge that both could be right. The challenge of space is only part of the challenge to our society. But even here, driver training classes won't teach you to fly a rocket. And worst of all, there's this. The larger challenge to modern America, however defined, is too often expressed in terms of competition with the Russians. As if the disappearance of the Russians tomorrow would allow us to proceed in our well-fed, unthinking way. The success of the Atlas program, specifically of Atlas 10B in its orbit, may have closed one gap between us and the Russians a little, although not as much as many think. As great an achievement as it is, it doesn't mean you're sending your children to better schools next week, or that your grandchildren will be any better prepared to meet the next century. Good evening.
NBC News has presented Chet Huntley reporting, the 121st program of the Outlook series. Chet Huntley reporting returns next Sunday at its usual time. This is Bill Hanrahan speaking.